Yes, good morning to everybody, and I'm thankful to be here. I will try to get my best English out for you. So I will talk, it's a bit different, it will be a combination more or less of the previous speaker and slightly going into the next speakers as well. And in order to guide you a bit through my presentation, I would like to start with an introduction about Europe, the European Union, and its agricultural policy, because this will influence big time what we are doing as a feed industry. Second thing, I will try to focus a bit on how low CP in diets can basically give an answer to the current and future challenges we are facing in Europe. Then some low CP in practice, and then some concluding remarks. So first of all, I want to, because in my presentation I will use probably the word Europe and European Union a bit combined, but I just want to highlight that when I'm talking about Europe and the European Union, for me that's the same, although on an agricultural perspective there is a difference between Europe and the European Union. Europe has about 50 countries, is the continent so to speak, and the European Union has 27 member states, of which about 20 are using the euro as a currency. When we talk about agricultural policy, that's EU material. I mean, that's European Union deciding stuff. And what are they deciding, or their policy is being summarized in what we call the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. And basically that's a policy which has been out there for over 60 years after the Second World War. They said, okay, we need to provide enough and affordable food for the European land. And so we want to, or for the European people, and we want to direct our policy to support farmers, indirect or direct. What we have seen the last years, the last 20 years more or less, that this European support has been redirected towards measures on, among others, also sustainability. And in the last European, or the CAP policy in 2023, which was last year going into service, I think it will go into 2027, you see a lot, and it may be a bit small for you, but you see a lot of things going around sustainability and environment. So the industry, the farmer, needs to take actions towards sustainability, environmental protection, to get support from the European Union, and the support via the European Union goes via the different member states. And the whole idea behind this is because Europe has decided some years ago on the European Green Deal. And the European Green Deal is basically has two major things, and this is trying to be a climate neutral continent by 2050 and to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared with 55% compared to 1990. And you see on the, let's say, the scheme here, the European Green Deal holds about 11 different topics to take into account. And one of the topics which concerns us the most as an industry, as a farming industry, is what they call the farm to feed strategy, the farm to fork strategy. And this is basically at the heart of the European Green Deal. And what does it mean? It basically means that we need to produce everything around food sustainable, but this is production, but also consumption, waste treatment, etc. So the whole industry, also other industries in Europe, have to focus more and more on sustainability. And of course, farming is the most visible one. And people are looking to us big time. What we expect, or I expect at least, is that we will have soon probably also a European Blue Deal, treating everything around water. Because, I'm from Belgium, and we have a lot of rain, but though we are one of the least countries with the least amount of water available. So we are being stressed on that as well, and most probably it will come in the upcoming years to also take care of that. In other words, sustainability is and will become a license to produce in the European Union. If a company does not adhere to the rules about sustainability, it's likely that it will go out of the business, because the European Union has decided a kind of complete chain approach. So one supplier needs to provide to its client data, and that client needs to provide data to its next client, and so on. So it's a closed chain, and it's not only on agriculture. I mean, all the industries are impacted by this, but of course we are focusing on agriculture today. And this has been, of course, decided, but it has been prone to protests as well. Especially, some of you may have heard this, like say 6 months ago, end of last year, beginning of this year, a lot of protests were on in Europe. A lot of farmers on the streets, a lot of tractors on the streets, a lot of manure on the streets, a bit everything on the street to protest against European decisions to go on sustainability. Not so much sustainability, but the pace they are wanting to have. It's too fast, too quick. People cannot adapt to that. Farmers are getting, let's say, office farmers instead of land farmers. They just have to fill in papers all day long. And just to give you a heads up, I tried to find a picture where you see Belgium, and I compared it to one of your states, more or less, in the US, and you see we represent practically nothing. Though we are very dense populated in pigs and people, and thus we have what we call a nitrogen problem together with the Netherlands, which is our neighbor. And the whole policy, and I can give you an example. For example, for swine, Belgian government has decided to reduce the pig population by 30% by 2030. So instead of trying to reduce excretions by measures, they take the easy route and they just kill a bunch of farmers and pigs along with it. So it is not easy, but we have to live with it, because in the end, and that's what we have seen throughout the policy of Europe throughout the years, is basically when legislation makes you do something. And this will be also the case here. It boosts innovation in agriculture. Maybe not always easy, but it does. Now, then you probably hope you will understand the next chapter, because low CP can be an answer to the current and future challenges, because I talked a lot about environment, but environment, it goes way beyond that as well. But first of all, I want to focus a bit, and I think the previous speaker already gave you a heads up, is that basically when you have excess protein in your diets, it leads to increased environmental pressure, and coming with it, increased nitrogen excretion. And you see a publication from a Canadian group, which basically looked at climate change impacts. You see on the left climate change, land use, eutrophication, acidification. And on the x-axis you see crude protein reduction, and on the y-axis the impact you will have. And you basically see a linear connection between reducing crude protein and reducing your environmental impact. And I'm a bit more naughty than the previous speaker, I would say. She said 1% point of CP reduction is 8.5 nitrogen reduction. I tried to keep a rule of thumb, which is a bit easier, and that's about 10%, because liter is going from 8 to 10, so I'm taking 10 then. So keep that in mind, that basically 1% point reduction is a reduction of 10% nitrogen excretion. And it may sound also a bit weird to you guys where you have a lot of soybean meal available, but for us, soybean meal is net imported. What does come along with reducing CP is that we also reduce, and in our case, we import a lot of Brazilian soybean meal, is then also reducing the deforested soybean meal into Europe. With that, we get some other challenges as nutritionists, because we have to work with protein sources which have a less ideal profile, which contain anti-nutritional factors we need to take care of, etc. So the life as a nutritionist in Europe is quite interesting, I would say, because you face challenges every day, because raw materials are just so different and so diverse. But in the end, everything goes to reduce the carbon footprint, and that's what Europe is aiming for, and that's why the industry is obliged basically to go for as well. Next thing, and Laura also already mentioned some of that, excess protein leads to increased intestinal stress, also the need for more antimicrobials, and basically what the Common Agricultural Policy basically states is also, okay, if you want to get money from the European Union, then you will need to take care of antimicrobial resistance. So it basically says reduce your antibiotic usage. And also you see again, I highlighted here, the farm to fork strategy comes into play again as well. So farm to fork is more than sustainability in the world of environment, but also animal welfare, animal health, and of course then also human health. To give you some examples, because I know in the US you are a bit higher, and I'm talking here about swine. in 2018. It's not a direct antimicrobial, but copper has also effects on intestinal health, and we reduced copper in swine feed back in 2018. So you are still a bit higher than we are. Also, since 2022, zinc oxide, high levels of zinc oxide has been forbidden to be used in piglet diets. So in the end, we just end up with some antibiotics we can use, but also there we have clear restrictions on the usage. I will show you in the next picture. And for poultry, I would say the prophylactic use of lincospectin has been also forbidden in 2022 in the broiler industry. To give you an idea, it's maybe a bit small again, but to give you an idea, you can see the graph. This is basically from Belgium, from the Knowledge Center on Antimicrobial Usage or antibiotic usage. You see basically the graph from 2011 till 2022, and you see basically a linear decrease more or less on antibiotic usage. And the different lines you could see here are the objectives set by the government to reach by the industry to reduce the antibiotic usage. And then we have here also, I took here also a snapshot on some multi-resistance E. coli in food-producing animals, where you see veal, young birds, and you see also a decline in that, a bit higher and a bit lower, but in the end we see some decline. So it's working, I would say. Third thing, and I'm referring back to the probably going to happen European Blue Deal, reducing your crude protein level in the diets will reduce your water intake because your excess nitrogen does not have to be excreted. That reduced water intake will also reduce your wet litter, reducing pododermatitis, hog burns, and basically also increase your animal welfare. And this is then back connected to the farm to fork strategy, which is then in the European Green Deal. So you see, low CP, I gave you already 3 examples. Basically, all 3 of the examples fit very well into where we are heading with our industry. Now, some people, especially in the swine industry, are saying, yeah, but if you reduce crude protein, your animals will start to expose damaging behavior, tail biting, ear biting, flank biting, etc. But basically, this is mainly supported because in the past, low CP was reduced without a balanced amino acid profile, because the non-bound amino acids, the crystalline amino acids, were not available as we have them today. So basically, we were forced to lower down CP without having the necessary tools to correct our amino acid profile in the proper way. And some interesting literature, if you want to get deep dive into this, this is a Wageningen study which basically shows this very nicely. Fourth thing, and I think Laura also mentioned it, protein is expensive. At least for us, we don't have a lot of, we are a net importer of soybean meal, and this is basically a bit of a graph since 2013, what soybean meal has been doing in Europe. So it's not only expensive, probably gets cheaper in the future, but it's volatile. I mean, we don't know what will happen. So that's also one of the things, and I said already before, deforested soybean meal has a very negative connotation, so in the end, we want to reduce it. Some examples from Belgium and Germany later on is basically what the European, or no, what the Belgian feed mill industry has said. Instead of waiting for the government to imply certain things, the industry has got together already many years before as well and said, okay, look guys, before you say something and oblige us, we will do our own homework and we will reduce crude protein in order to show our goodwill to be able to work on it. And I gave you some examples here of piglet diets, and you see here a maximum CP in piglets for 7 to 25 kilos of 17.5, and I think Laura was about industry average, about 20, I think, or 21 at that age. So you see where we are already at today, and this is maximized. On the other hand, Laura also mentioned these heavier pigs until 11% we can go. Today we are at 14%. We still have some room to go down, but of course performance needs to follow in that. For broilers, which you are all experts in, is you see here the maximum CP levels which are being put by the industry. So the feed which is produced is not higher than this. We also have this for phosphorus, if you want to know. So phosphorus is an equal big problem as nitrogen. Example from Germany. This is basically a summary of where Germany is in over the past 20 years with their crude protein levels in the different stages of the broilers. And then in blue you see an overall trend, and you see a declining trend in CP level in the broiler industry as well. And of course people can say, yeah, but what happens, because you talked about environment all the time, but what happens with productivity? Of course, what we see in productivity over these past 20 years, productivity just went up. I mean, feed conversion ratio went down, efficiency went up. Of course, this is not solely related to the fact that CP has been decreasing, because the broilers have evolved, of course, with them. But there is no negative effect of CP reducing at the same time with a more efficient bird coming up. Now, basically, what my conclusion could be is that the more efficient we make these animals, the better it is for our sustainability, the better it is for the environment. And this is becoming, in my opinion, I'm talking a bit personal here, is becoming a bit of a paradox. Because on the one hand, the farm-to-fork strategy says, okay, you need to make it sustainable, but at the same time they say, okay, you need to make it animal welfare friendly as well. And at this point, they are quite opposite of each other. This is a study from the UK already some years ago, but you see on the left the standard broiler, and we are looking at the red box, which is the global warming potential. You see basically the standard broiler there, which has a lower global warming potential than a free-range bird or an organic bird. And this is becoming a very big topic now, because on the one hand we need to do the one thing, and on the other hand you want us to keep the animals in a better welfare condition. So that's not easy. On top, EFSA, which is the European Food and Safety Authority, published recently welfare guidelines on the farm. They are guidelines, they are not rules at this point, but basically what they say, to get optimum broiler welfare, we need to reduce stocking density. We need to maximize growth of the animals per day. So that means that we are not working with these high-performance birds anymore, but we are working with these slow-grower breeds at this point for some things. Housing, which needs to be changed, etc. So not only the cost will increase, but also the density, the efficiency of the animals will go down. So it will be prone to further discussions, I'm sure, in the near future. Okay, going a bit into practice, and to make a bit the bridge between the swine, pure swine we saw earlier, and the pure poultry which will come up. I start here with an example of piglets. What will happen with productivity when you lower down CP? And this is a study which we did together with Wageningen University, and it's not a comparison between CP levels. It is basically a dose-response study on isoleucine to find out the requirement, as Laura also just mentioned. But what we used was a level of 15% crude protein in these early diets, so very, very low. And I don't want to focus on the outcomes as such here, but what we saw is that the average daily gain and average daily feed intake is quite high, at least according to European standards. So with 15% and with a very balanced amino acid profile, except isoleucine, because that was our testing ingredient, you see basically very good performance coming up. But there are other examples out there, and this is an example. This is a study from 2022, 2023 something, from Denmark, when zinc oxide was going to be banned from the European feed mill industry and piglets. And what they did was a positive control with high CP, about 18.7 in our case, with zinc, so the old school, I would like to call it, and then the negative control, which is high CP without zinc. And then LCP, a low CP diet, so no zinc, low CP in the first two phases, around 15.5, 15.1% protein, corrected with all amino acids, essential amino acids, up till phenylalanine and tyrosine. So in the end, basically how it should be. But what they saw was this. Body weight at entry was equal, but body weight at exit was 1.5 kgs less on the end weight. However, pig diarrhea treatments went significantly down. Treatments days per pig went significantly down. So basically my first or second point in my previous slides was low CP helps you to get a better gut, confirmed. However, your performance goes down. And then, of course, it's always finding out why is that, because the logic, the literature, the biomechanism would say if you could go down in CP, but you correct for amino acids, it should be fine. And this is, but it's a bit too much to read for you all, but basically what happened in the study, they corrected their amino acids until phenylalanine and tyrosine, but something happened in the dosage. So in the end, their next limiting amino acids were lower than expected and also lower than the industry standards which they were using. And so what they say in this study, it's likely that the unintended undersupply of amino acids may have a significant effect on growth performance of the low CP pigs. And also the unsatisfying results in the current trial may therefore be caused by a combination of essential amino acids or a limited amount of nitrogen to cover the synthesis of non-essential amino acids. So basically, this is proving when you're going low CP, but you don't take care of your amino acid ratios in a proper way, the chance that you will fail is pretty high. Now, moving a bit to broilers, and I think I listened to the speakers the past 2 days also in the amino acid sessions, and I think a lot of things I will mention here are already on the radar. Unfortunately, they are not yet solved. I think Laura also said in swine we don't know, but sometimes also in poultry we don't know yet, but at least we need to take care, especially in a condition where we are having less antibiotic usage. We need to take care. I mean, a nutritionist cannot hide behind antibiotics anymore. He has to, formulation will determine the outcome no matter what. So the first point we need to pay attention is amino acid digestibility. And it might sound very, very easy and say, okay, we know that. What is the digestibility values of our ingredients? Yeah, okay. Sometimes, but you don't always know the processing conditions. You don't know always how hard the soybean meal has been toasted or not, etc. So it's basically not always that clear, and I will give you an example later on in the presentation as well. So what I always say, and I think Laura also mentioned it, is limiting the amount of undigested protein going into the hindgut. And this is quantity. Easy, 16 becomes 15, we reduce CP, but it's also a matter of quality. What is your amino acid digestibility? Second thing we need to take into account is the next limiting amino acid or the amino acid requirements in a low CP context. And yeah, okay, I'm working for an amino acid company, but we are working fiercely to get all these new secondary amino acids on track, with the requirements, because data is sometimes lacking. Next limiting amino acids would be arginine, tryptophan, leucine, isoleucine, histidine, phenylalanine. And you may wonder why I put here leucine, because we just heard in the US diets you have a lot of leucine. We heard it also past couple of days. In Europe, we are mainly based on wheat, soy, wheat, corn, low soy amounts, barley, rye, and leucine is not in excess in our diets. In contrast, it's even often in deficiency. So that's a bit of a difference. So what we are doing right now is also to determine the leucine requirements not only in broilers, but also in swine. And I want to focus now more specifically on two amino acids, and this is arginine. And I think one of the next speakers will focus a bit too much, so I hope I don't piss too much in his pool. But anyhow, I will give you an example from Europe. And then also I want to focus a bit on histidine, because when I made this presentation a couple of weeks ago, there was not a lot out there, but Dr. Kidd here in front made to change a bit my opinion on that, because histidine requirements studies are on their way. And Dr. Kidd's group presented this week also some data on that. But in the end, the breeder companies so far don't have recommendations for histidine, so we are a bit blind if you so want, what is going on with histidine, but I want to give you some heads up on histidine as well. Just a little side note here, and this becomes increasingly important since we are not having a lot of antibiotics anymore, or we want to reduce the antibiotic usage, is basically take into account what amino acid does on functionality, I mean on gut health. And this is a review study from France, where they have basically reviewed the impact of different amino acids on different aspects of gut health. So interesting to read, and also interesting to keep in mind that basically amino acids serve a bigger purpose than just muscle protein accretion, that they also serve to the body for other protein components, for example, in the immune system. Now, coming back to arginine, I want to share with you this study from University of Bologna in Italy. It's non-related to CJ, but it's a nice study, I think. And this is basically a study where they had 4 phases. They grow out the birds quite heavily. I mean, this is not so common in Europe to go so high. I think in the US you are a bit more into this. But anyhow, what they did a ratio of 106 to 108 in the basal diet. It's based on total, not digestible. It was not mentioned in the study what was digestible, but we can assume it will be more or less the same ratio. And then the treatment was going up to 120. And this is what they saw. So these are the different periods. This graph on the left, these are the different periods as such. So the different grower stages. You see a feed conversion ratio which is lower, and a growth which is increased. And on the right side, you see basically the combination of the treatments. Afterwards, you see significant impact on body weight, significant impact on daily weight gain, and significant impact on feed conversion ratio. So higher arginine supply in this case showed some nice effects. They also looked into microbiota and stuff like that. It's a bit too complicated for me, but in the end they saw some nice data out, so I would suggest you to read it. And I just want to mention something, because yesterday also one of the speakers mentioned arginine on meat quality, and this is true. In this study, they were expecting higher meat quality of lower incidence of myopathies, but they saw in contrast a higher incidence in the white striping, and it was not so much related to the fact that they had arginine because they were expecting lower, but it was related to the fact that the arginine bird just got so much heavier than the control birds. Moving a bit to histidine, like I said earlier, breeder companies don't have recommendations at this point, so it's a bit, going into the blind. We rely on some older research. Luckily, there is some new data coming up, which is giving some ideas. And histidine basically has a couple of main functions, and a lot of people, even in Europe, even though it's already limiting in a lot of our diets, people just didn't care about histidine too much. It's like, you know, the little brother standing in the corner, nobody cares about him. And though it has important important impacts on many processes. For example, hemoglobin and myoglobin, this what we call imidazole ring, impacts the formation of hemoglobin and myoglobin. It also has an impact or a role in gastrointestinal tract. It's stimulating gastric acid secretion. It's a neurotransmitter, and it also has an impact on the immune system. And last but not least, it's also part of, or is essential for the formation of carnosine and anserine, which are called the histidine-containing dipeptides. And you can find a picture here on the right, which is basically carnosine as a molecule is composed out of histidine and beta-alanine, and together they form carnosine, but you see that the arrows are also going the other way back, so meaning that carnosine potentially can serve as a pool to supply histidine again to the animal. And this would be, I guess, the only amino acid which basically has a storage form in the body, not only as carnosine, but potentially also, for example, hemoglobin. Now, when we talk about histidine-containing dipeptides, I like to call them the next-gen supermolecules, because if you type them on Google, oh my God, what you find is amazing. It will solve all the problems in the world. I mean, not only in broilers, but it will solve diseases. It's amazing. So, may not be all true, but there is some science behind which points out that histidine or carnosine could be more important than what we currently think. Because it's mainly stored in the brains and in the muscles, and if we talk about broilers, we talk mainly about breast, which has the highest concentration of carnosine, anserine, then the thigh, and then the drumstick. So basically, for the most valuable part, we see a big concentration of carnosine being there. And what does carnosine or these histidine-containing dipeptides do? They basically are buffering components. They have antioxidative properties, and they prevent protein glycation. So in the end, you could imagine that there would be some impact on meat quality as well. Yeah, and I just pointed, when you Google, you will find this back. I mean, athletes are taking it. In human nutrition, it's mostly beta-alanine, which is the rate limiting. In animals, it seems that histidine will be the rate limiting component to form carnosine. So keeping that in mind, this could complicate our work as an amino acid producer as well, because to determine the requirement, it could be that this pool of histidine may interfere with our requirement, because other studies have already seen that basically fast grower birds don't store as much carnosine in the muscle. They just use it for performance first and then start to store it, because in this trial they compared slow growers with fast growers, and basically they saw a different amount of histidine or histidine containing dipeptides being stored in the muscle. So it could well be that this interferes a lot with our requirement studies for histidine in the upcoming period. So I talked about amino acid digestibility, I talked about arginine, I talked about histidine a bit. What are the next potential challenges? And I will not deep dive into it because I know some other speakers will also talk about it. And I think Laura also mentioned it in swine. Yeah, what about the non-essential amino acids? We are going down with our CP to a certain point that potentially the formation of non-essentials are being compromised. And in poultry then we look to glycine, to serine, glycine equivalents. We look to asparagine, glutamine as next limiting. Lysine to CP ratio, essential amino acid nitrogen to total nitrogen, NPN sources, question mark. In swine there has been already some research out there supplying NPN sources, and it has a positive effect on low CP diets. Question will be, will it work in broilers or not? Then a question popping up, especially when we increase the amount of unbound amino acids, questions pops up from time to time. Yeah, are we not going too high? Are we not going, desynchronized, because they are taken up in the small intestine pretty fast compared to bound amino acids in the protein? But we see today, and there is some recent research out there by the University of Hohenheim in Germany, which basically states, okay, don't worry too much at this point. We have still a lot of room for margin to increase the unbound amino acids before we need to worry about the fact that they are too high. Increased adipose tissue, starch to protein ratio. As we decrease CP, we increase the starch. The ratio becomes a bit different. We also, I believe, yesterday in the session of amino acids, people were talking about that and how to solve it potentially. In our case, then also DEB balance becomes more and more of a concerning point, or potentially concerning point, because as you know, we don't have a lot of soybean meal. We reduce the soybean meal. On top, we are used to use lysine HCl in the diet, which is then adding a bit of chlorine on top. So the DEB balance is going down and down and down. And the question will be, how will this impact further our performance potentially? I want to finish with a low CP trial we conducted in Europe. It's not yet published, where we basically had a couple of treatments, and the objective was to decrease dietary crude protein content in one hand, and on the other hand, we also decrease the soybean meal content without decreasing the CP level. I will show you the treatments right away so you can more get yourself into it. So we looked at performance parameters, carcass parameters, and so on. And what we did was we used our recommendations on arginine, which are a bit higher than the breeder at that time, was 112 SID arginine to lysine ratio and a 38 SID histidine to lysine ratio. And all the other requirements were based on breeder guidelines. So these are the treatments. So you see treatment 1 is what we call a normal CP diet, would be probably a bit lower than what you are used to today here in the US. So 21 in the starter, grower 20, finisher 19. And then we basically went down in treatment 2 with reducing the finisher with 2 points. Treatment 3 was grower and finisher reduction, so finisher 2 points, grower 1 point, and then treatment 4 was basically low CP all over the place, so from starter till finisher, starter grower with 1 point, finisher still with 2 points. Then separate from that, we had also 2 treatments with reduced soybean meal, but with equal CP content as in treatment 1. So we reduced CP to max 15% soybean meal. We reduced soybean meal to max 15%, has nothing to do with the CP. CP remained the same. And 0 soybean meal in the last treatment, so 0% soybean meal. And to give you a bit of an idea how the formulations looks like when you try to do this, so we had here in the first treatment 1, 2, 3, which were normal CP in the starter 21. Treatment 4 at that time was already at 20. Treatment 5 and 6, you see here 15% soybean meal and no soybean meal. And then what comes into play are, let's say, more local raw materials which we have, so some rapeseed meal, field beans, peas, and then also a big amount of corn gluten meal. And you may wonder, but why do you use corn gluten meal? But because when we have this type of formulation, we are already pretty much in leucine deficiency, so we need to correct it with that as well, because we did not use synthetic leucine here in this trial. So you can see that at the same time you see these next limiting amino acids popping up. And in the end, we did not really take into account glycine here. We did not correct the DEB level because we wanted to make a bit more commercial style what feed mills could do. And this is what we saw here in the starter. This is the grower, same principle. So the same principle, the same ingredients which comes up, and then also the same next limiting amino acids. And then the same for the finisher diet, pretty much equal. I see my lines were a bit shifted here, but there was 15% soybean meal inside. It's not to bar the 15%, it's just a wrong line. Now, when we look to performance, this is what we saw. And to be honest, it came out with a bit of surprises. So here we have the normal CP, finishing down, starter grower finisher down, and starter grower finisher down in CP. And basically what we saw, we did not observe any significant decrease in performance, even a slightly higher numerical difference. Feed conversion ratio remained more or less the same as well. And as we removed soybean meal from the diet, we saw an increase in performance. And to be honest, we did not expect that to happen, because the raw materials which we replaced soybean meal with was, you remember, field beans, peas. They usually don't have the same amino acid digestibility as soybean meal. So what could be a potential reason for this is that, the estimation of our soybean meal was just wrong. We analyzed it, of course, but we did not, the digestibility we did not do. So we just used the table books, but apparently, probably, there had something to be wrong here. Another explanation could be that when we are reducing soybean meal and we add more synthetic amino acids, we give the bird just enough true amino acids to work with. So it could be also a combination of the both, because we see at the same time also here some variation, which is, okay, not significant, but is certainly not negative. And when you look back to the diets, soybean meal was decreased to a certain level, is grower here, but it was not 20% less. It was 5, 6, 10% less. So it could be that the supply of unbound amino acids gave that response as well. This is basically the discussion I already did now. And then to carcass characteristics, in the end we did not observe too much differences. Breast weight went up a bit, leg weight went down or kept a bit stable. But when we look to the breast yield and the leg yield, we see some increase in breast yield, especially when we didn't have the soy treatments. Overall, of course, it's not always statistically different, but we did not observe any negative effects on the breast yield. Food path lesions, and this is more or less to be expected or to be hoped, because if you reduce your crude protein, I mentioned earlier, normally your water consumption will go down because you don't need excess nitrogen excretion. You would expect better food path scoring, and this is what we saw. You can see that especially treatment 4 and treatment 2 in this case has significant differences on the mean values compared to the control diet. And when we reduced soybean meal, the values numerically different a bit, but were not statistically different. And when we observe here on the right side this graph, you basically can see the severity or the meat food pad lesion scorings on day 35 of the different groups. And basically what you see is that treatment 4 also gives you the best or the least severe pododermatitis. So to finish, I hope I gave you a bit of insights on how Europe or the European Union is moving forward, that we are following the Green Deal objectives, and it's not a choice. Basically, it's more an obligation, but the industry tries to adapt, and we adapt, and that crude protein is basically one of the major contributors in our industry, in the animal feed business, to get closer to the European Green Deal goals. So main drivers for CP are economy, ecology, and efficiency. I hope I gave you some heads on that. And then basically in reducing crude protein in pig and poultry is possible without losing performance if we, of course, and that's our responsibility, if we have enough non-bound amino acids available, if we know our amino acid digestibilities, and I mean, it needs to be precise, especially if we go non-medicated. I mean, this becomes super important. There are some variables which are still under investigation, but we already, I think, have a clear idea in which direction we need to look for. And I think Laura also concluded with that, between controlled condition and practice, there is a big world of difference, but we have to start somewhere, and I think in Europe we already use it in practice also to have enough confidence to say that it will work also elsewhere in the world. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.